In freezing cold on the balcony, I felt the snowflakes gently landing on my cheeks. Despite the biting chill, I didn't want to return to the noisy indoors. Just then, a warm embrace wrapped around me, and Aloricus's presence made me forget the harshness outside. Yet, his playful and reckless nature left me feeling helpless, as this warmth concealed an impending crisis. Chapter 43. Closing my eyes, I turned my face up towards the sky, flinching slightly as the cold snowflakes fell against my skin, melting instantly, the chilly breeze freezing my body through my coat. To maintain some warmth, I crossed my arms tightly across my chest. It wasn't enough. My body still trembled with shivers, but I wasn't ready to go inside yet. It was so peaceful out here on the balcony. All you could see for miles was an endless stretch of white snow, a few evergreens here and there disturbing the peace. But they too were beautiful. Inside was another story. We were being ambushed by Coles, and all the papers that we had to sign, all the new treaties of every pack, all the negotiations Alphys were dealing with. And Aloricus and I had to look through every single package and initial it. Aloricus had been interviewing a few of his most trusted employees to make them royal advisors, and since I knew nothing about the job of an advisor, I'd snuck out. Although we already had one advisor, Frank had teared up when we told him he was to become one. Of course, making Frank advisor meant having to promise Adrian he and his sister would both be advisors to once they grew up. Two large arms wrapped around my waist, settling over my own arms, a broad chest being pressed against my back. I relaxed back into him as he cocooned me in his warmth. Aloricus, I breathed out, my breath visible in the air for a moment before it's gone. He hums gently, resting his chin on my head, tightening his arms around me. Is my queen tired? Aloricus asked, and I smiled, shaking my head. Did you need me? No, I can handle the potential advisors myself, but it was getting too boring without you, so I snuck out. Aloricus tells me, and my brows furrow as I turn in his arms to look at him. Weren't you the one doing the interviews? How could you possibly sneak out? I asked, and he gave me a small sheepish smile. Well, I just sort of stood up and left, he admitted, making my eyes widen. You can't do that, you big oaf. It's impolite. I hissed at him. Punish me, he said huskily with an irritatingly attractive smirk on his annoying symmetrical face. Bite me, I replied sickly, having been woken up far too early to deal with his flirtation. He snapped his teeth at me teasingly, making my eyes widen, chuckling at my reaction as bent down to press and bend a kiss to my cold cheek. Flinching at how cold it was, I let out a gasp as he put both of his large hands on my face out of a sudden, trying to step away, but only to hit against the rail of the balcony. I tried to ask him what he was doing, but my voice was muffled by his gigantic palm. I had to repeat it a few times before he finally understood. I'm warming your face up. It's so cold, he answered simply, not moving his hands. Having no other option, I bit into his palm. Out of reflex, he pulled away, pouting as he shook out his bitten hand. I was only warming you up. Aloricus winced sulkily. For some strange reason, after that meeting, he turned more childish than usual. He was like a haughty, childish adult. And safe to say, it was a little spooky. And I was only tasting your hand, I replied, and his honey eyes glinted mischievously as he wagged his eyebrows at me. Well, in that case, you may bite me whenever you'd like, he said cheekily. What is it about Mondays that makes you so horny? I asked, and he laughed shortly under his breath at my choice of words. You're so grumpy on Mondays. Especially in the morning, it's just so adorable it makes me want to pounce on you and cuddle you till the end of time. I stared at him blankly for a moment, not knowing how to feel about that. All right, well, moving on. We should be getting back to the office, I said, and Aloricus made a face at the thought of going back to all that. Unfortunately, we both did not have a very strong willpower when it came to completely necessary but boring tasks. I had to be the strong one. Otherwise, Aloricus and I would still be in bed cuddling. Although thinking about it, that sounded like a wonderful way to spend our time. I really wasn't liking being queen, but it was something that had to be done. How about we take a vacation? Aloricus asked, and I scoffed. We've barely been working for a week and you already need a vacation. My grandmother has a better stamina than you, and it's been years since she passed. I muttered grumpy. Actually, I have quite the stamina, love, Alarica said suggestively. And I would bet my fuzzy's tea-socks the man was laughing at his own little innuendo right now. That's enough, freaky wolf. We'll see how excited you are when you have to get back to all those treaties. The treaties of all the larger packs are yet to be read, I remind him, and I hear him sigh sadly behind me. All right, let's go. There is no way we are going to cut into bedtime for this, so might as well get to it now. Alaricus mutters, letting go of my waist and stepping back. Did you know there are actually people out there that don't like cuddling? Alaricus asked, and I looked up at him to see his eyes wide. He seemed positively terrified at the idea. I said shortly and he nodded immediately. Eros must be quite close to the surface for Alaricus to be unable to pick up on sarcasm. As we get to our office, Alaricus rushed ahead to hold open the door for me, and I nodded my gratitude as I walked past him. Going into his office, I settled down on one of the large leather chairs. Alaricus sat on the identical chair across from mine, passing me one of the thick booklets to look over as he starts reading one. Alaricus had guided me through a few, just so I knew the look, furs and possible loopholes that the alphas may cleverly incorporate in. But once I got the hang of it, it was more efficient for the both of us to do them separately and then initial it. I tried to keep myself from zoning out as I read through the 30-plus page treaty, and to do so Alaricus and I were mouthing the words to ourselves silently. But even then I had to read some paragraphs a few times over just to ensure I had actually interpreted what I was reading. Signing off on the treaty, a small smile came to my face as I saw the initials of Alpha Lily and her mate. No wonder the treaty had been written with so little bias. A werewolf and her human mate had written it together. I passed it over to Alaricus for him to initial it to. The treaty he had picked had unfortunately not been as smooth a read. He was circling things and making notes feverishly. That one would be sent back to the Alpha and signed, along with a phone call. Which Pack wrote, that one. And Alaricus looks up, the cap of his pen held between his lips, strands of his hair having dropped into his forehead as he wrote. The pen dropped from between his lips as he opened his mouth to respond, and he jumps a little as it clatters to the ground. The Alpha King was the cutest little monkkin in the world. Alpha Con, Alaricus muttered, and my nose crunches in distaste at the mention of him. Why couldn't the man be more like his cousin? Alpha Ibrahim's treaty had been the first one I'd read on my own, and it had been a delightfully smooth 28 pages to read. It's as though he wasn't present at the meeting. Alaricus mumbled. He was quite injured for most of it, I said, and a little smile blossomed on Alaricus' face. A faraway look in his eyes as though he were remembering thrashing Khan. It was a bit alarming, but I wasn't the man's biggest fan myself, so for all I cared Alaricus could giggle at his pain. We should call as we go, I grudgingly said to Alaricus. It wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. The man hadn't been a very lovely person as it was, but now that Nicole, his mate, had left him, he was probably even worse. I personally had been quite happy when I'd heard the news, but surely Alphacon did not share that sentiment. Alaricus rummaged through the drawers of his desk before coming up with a little black leather book. I didn't know they still made phone books. Everyone else just saved numbers into their phones. He flipped through the pages quickly, before stopping on one, and whipped his cell phone out, dialing the digits quickly. I raised a brow at him, looking pointedly at the black book, and his cheeks turned a little red. As he mouthed for me to hush up, he put it on speaker and we waited in silence until Con finally picked up. Alpha Con speaking, he said shortly, making Alaricus and I roll our eyes simultaneously. Con, it's Alaricus and Amara. We looked over your treaty, and there's quite a few revisions that need to be done. I couldn't help but feel proud of him. Despite the fact that Alaricus passionately hated Alphacon, he spoke to him the way he would any other alpha. Well, don't you just send it right back and I'll look it over for you, Your Majesties, Alphacon said, but there was something oddly biting about his tone, almost as if he were being sarcastic. Alarikas and I made eye contact, looking at each other confused for a moment. "By the way, I'm sorry about your window in advance," Alphacon said right before the line went dead. The both of us stared at the phone in confusion for a moment. Had the man finally gone completely insane? My heart skipped a beat in my chest as I realized what that meant. We were under attack. I whispered to Alarikas, dropping to my knees. I crawled over to his intercom system in a hurry, pressing the talk button so that my voice would be heard throughout the entire castle. "Everyone, wherever you are, drop to your knees and get away from the windows." I repeat, get away from the windows. Barely even pressing the button to end the message before Alarikas was on top of me, curling us both up into a ball, with him completely covering my body with his. Seconds later, a loud crash resonated from the floor below us. That muttered broken the glass wall of the greenhouse. Alarikas wrapped his arms tightly around me, pressing a deep kiss to my forehead. "I love you," he mumbled, his voice deeper and huskier, and I didn't even have the time to reply before he gotten up and stood away from me. I watched in hushed silence as Alarikas grew taller, his muscles becoming larger, his chest and shoulders widening, his thin, sharp jaw dropping open fractionally as the sharp canines grew to rest on his bottom lip. He panted desperately for a moment, before his blazing golden eyes fell to meet mine. Eros growled, lunging forward to scoop me off the ground, and holding me close to his chest. Bending down a bit, he gently nuzzled his nose to the side of my cheek affectionately. "Cyanide," a deep voice said from the office door, and we both turned to see one of the guards standing there, staring directly at the floor. "Alphacon is at the palace gate, along with many other wolves. Your guards are stationed as per the plan. What would you like us to do, sire?" the guard asked, Eros tight and his hold on me, before walking out of the office, cocking his head to get the guard to follow him. Normally I wouldn't be all right with being carried around in front of strangers, but I knew Eros desperately needed to be close to me to keep his cool. Guards will keep Con from getting into palace. Palace people that can't fight will go to the safe room and wait. Eros will come outside to deal with Con, Eros said, turning into the guard's wing of the palace, with me still in his arms. Unfortunately, I had not yet been made aware of what happened if the palace were to ever be an attack. Eros marched into one of the rooms. A group of guards were pacing around in there, while one sat before a large thin glass screen that displayed a live viewing of the outside of the palace, all of them talking quickly into their phones, and from what I could hear, they were discussing strategies with the other palace guards. The palace had both human and wolf guards. The wolves were usually positioned outside, while the humans stayed inside and took care of surveillance. If ever the palace was under attack, the wolf guards' physical advantage over the humans made it a lot more sensible to have them defend the palace. Eros walked right up to the guard sitting in the large leather chair out. He growled at the guard, but only now seemed to realize Eros and I were in the room. The guard immediately stumbled off the chair, all of them dropping into awkward bows of respect before us, and then going straight back to their phones. Eros gently sat me down into the chair. "Mate, watchgate through the screen. Eros, go outside and kill Con." Eros growled out, pressing a soft kiss to my head, inhaling the scent of my hair deeply. About to leave, but I grabbed onto his arm. "Eros will be careful, and you will not kill anyone. You will keep everyone in the palace safe. No one will die tonight. Promise me," I asked him sternly. "Bu," Eros starts, but I cut him off by pressing my lips to his. "Promise me, Eros," I whispered against his lips. "Promise," Eros whispered back, pecking my lips one more time before he was off with the guard that had come to get us from the office. His back tense as he tries to keep from looking back at me. Him and the guard were gone from my sight in seconds, and I looked at the screen to see a clear view of the entire palace front. A gasp escaped me as I realized Con had brought what looked to be nearly his entire pack, and a few of the other alphas that were reluctant about the new treaty. But those alphas were much smarter than he was and seemed to have brought only their warriors, not their entire pack, to be at the danger of being wiped out. They growled out words at the 40 or so guards who stood against the gates. trying to keep it from being opened as Khan and his people tried to break it open. Guarding the outside of the palace wouldn't be an issue as soon as Eros got there. He could handle much more than what Khan had brought. It was keeping the people inside the palace safe that mattered most. My heartbeat increasing as I see them all back off. They couldn't possibly be leaving so soon. The guards stood no chance as the hundreds of people went charging at the gate, all crashing into it. And the lock gave in, the gate cracking open. Khan pushed it with all his might, managing to weasel through, as did some of his warriors. Eros and the guard got to the gate just as Khan began to fight all the guards that surround him. Eros let out a deafening growl, that although the screen has no sound, I could hear from the inside of the palace. Everyone seemed to stop in place for a moment, most unable to stand, and their inner wolf forces them to drop to their knees before that power. Only Khan and a few alphas stay standing, but even they can't stand straight. Their necks bend in submission before him. I saw Eros start to talk and I turned to the guards, who had been eyeing me warily, looking quite unsure what to do with themselves. Sound. I yelled at them and they jumped, before hurrying forward to set the screen up so that I could hear what was being said. "Can we get you anything, Your Highness?" one of the guards asked awkwardly as the others fumbled with the screen. "No, but thank you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Swallowing the sarcastic reply I wished to give him. Worthless alpha that brings his pack to be killed. Eros growled out as the men finally got the sound on. "Then kill them. They'd gladly be killed for what is right. Unlike you, they are loyal to their kind." Alpha Khan yelled, and some of his people cheered behind him, while others' faces grew so ashen. It looked as though they would faint right then and there. Eros seemed to notice the same thing. "Wolves that don't want to fight go home. Night will protect you." Eros yelled out to them. "Leave now and you won't have a pack to go home to." Khan threatened, and I heard 5 collective gasps behind me, making me wince as I turned to glare at the guards behind me. As king, Night gives his word. Turn away now and nothing will be lost. Eros will set Khan straight. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Do you hear that, people? His wolf isn't a part of him. The legend is true. He's a cursed wolf. He's not a born wolf the way we are. He wasn't meant to lead us. Another alpha pipes in, and I struggle to remember her name but simply can't. What does that have to do with anything? He could still beat all their asses. A guard whispers from behind me. "Battle us, cursed one. If you win, we will retreat and obey your rules. If we win, the palace is ours. You and your mate will be hung." Khan offered, and Eros lets out a deadly growl. Filthy alpha'd air speak of mate. Eros boomed, and I zoomed in on him to see him nearly vibrating with anger. The veins of his forehead sticking out. His handsome face contorted in anger. Eyes blazing a gold so bright it's nearly blinding. Zooming out from him, I'm shocked to see that nearly half of Khan's little army has left. They were an easy bunch to scare. Beckoning one of the guards forward, I keep my eyes glued on the screen as I speak to him. Ensure the ones who left are going home. Make sure there's none that may be trying to get into the palace another way, or even lurking in the forest. I commanded. There's guards positioned all around the palace, and cameras everywhere that are being watched. You need not worry, Your Highness. The wolf troops have arrived. I will send some of them into the forest. The guard said, pulling his phone out again. Track those men, and keep in touch with them. I'm trusting you to keep them safe. I said to him, and he bowed shortly before leaving the room. I turned back to the screen to see Khan make the first move. He lunged towards Eros, initiating the attack. But to his absolute humiliation, Eros simply smacked him away with one hand. Mid-flight, he fell clumsily into the heavy snow. Attack! Khan yelled to the people, and they ran towards the guards, many of them being tossed away by Eros before they could even reach the palace guards. Eros' movements were nearly indistinguishable to my human eyes, I could only tell where he was according to where he'd last been. The nearest wolf that randomly dropped was thrown far into the snow. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Con attack one of the guards, and he bit straight into his throat, tearing his head clean off. A teardrop from my eye, trailing Ono my cheek as I saw the man's body fall to the ground, seeing Con move on to the guard right beside him, doing the same with him. The guards were highly trained, but they weren't as capable as a genetically advantageous alpha was in battle. My eyes darted across the large screen, finally finding Eros, who had come to a standstill, still gripping one of the warriors by his collar, and he let go of him, allowing him to drop to the ground. The warrior immediately pounced onto him, but he barely even reached Eros' shoulder in height, and despite how he was ramming into him, he couldn't even move Eros. But he kept trying as Eros tried to sniff out where all the blood was coming from. Amongst all the injured bleeding wolves, I zoomed in on Eros, seeing his top lip pull away from his teeth in a snarl. I struggled to navigate the screen as he wound through the battle, heading straight for Con, who was battling a member of the wolf troops, having gotten much closer to the palace doors by now. I barely even registered what I was doing before I was running. I slammed the door open, the guards yelling behind me as I sprinted through the palace to get to the front door. I threw it open, spotting the 3 men that were still yards away from me. I ran through the snow, now cursing the heavily falling snow. It would keep Eros from smelling me out and becoming distracted by my scent enough to stop from killing Con. If Eros were to kill even one person, it was quite probable he'd go insane after being held back for all those years. Killing someone did something to a person. It submerged you into the darkness. And if Eros fell back into it, then Alarikas and him would never get the chance to come back out. Eros was right behind Con now. Just a few more steps and he would be on top of him. I wouldn't make it in time. I stooped down, quickly rolling up a large snowball, the heat from my bare hands getting the snow to mold into a tight ball quicker. Leaning back, I threw it with all my might at Eros, wincing as it hit Con right in the face instead. But that was enough to get Eros to stop and look up to see where the snowball had come from. Bless Marina for having loved snowball fights when we were children. Even though I'd missed my target, my plan had still worked. Changing his path, Eros barreled towards me, immediately scooping me up and out of the snow as he reached me. He cradled me to his warm chest. Only then did I realize how cold I was. My socks were soaking wet. I couldn't feel my toes, and my fingers were so cold I was afraid they'd fall off. I dug my fingers into the collar of the coat he wore, breathing heavily against him. Wise mate outside. Eros whispered to me, "You will not kill. You promise me. You will not kill Con." I panted out, and Eros frowned deeply, turning around only for us to be thrown to the ground as Con and the other alphas jumped on top of us. Eros rolled us over quickly so that I was under him in the snow, taking all of the force of the attack himself. He struggled to keep his weight off of me. "Push them off. I know you can do it," I whispered to him, feeling him tense above me, his coat beginning to rip at the seams when his muscles flexed. Carefully, Alarikas got onto his knees above me, before elbowing one of the alphas right in the nose, the sickening crunch making me wince. He jumped up immediately, pushing the other 3 alphas aside easily. Shaky, I tried to push myself up and out of the snow, squinting to see the gates, seeing the black and yellow uniforms of the wolf troops surrounding the gate. From the looks of it, they had managed to get the rest of Con's army in control and out of the palace. Most of the guards must be quite injured as I couldn't make out their grey uniforms in the distance. They must have gone back into the palace. Now that the wolf troops were here, we would be fine. They were the international army of a sort, well-trained, high-ranking wolves that stepped in when there was a threat of mass destruction. They'd been created to keep the rebellion against the wolves under control, and now that Alarikas was king, their loyalty lay with him. I looked back at Eros to see he'd knocked out 2 of the alphas, and was currently battling a 3rd, but Con was nowhere to be seen. I whirled around, trying to find him, before waving my arms to try to get the troops' attention. They needed to find him, and fast. Hopefully he hadn't gotten into the palace, and if he had, I hoped the guards would be able to handle him. A sharp scream escaped my lips as an arm wrapped painfully tightly around my waist, yanking me into a hard chest. Eros' golden gaze flew to meet mine, and he quickly headbutted his opponent, effectively knocking them out. I twisted my neck to see Elphicon behind me. I struggled in his hold, trying to elbow him, but my hits did nothing to loosen his hold. If I had thought seeing the man emotionals was scary, seeing the look in his eyes now was downright terrifying. His dark eyes were glinting manically, and a triumphant smile was on his face. The man had gone positively insane. I'd seen wolves that lost their mates. They were sad, miserably so, but they didn't lose their sanity the way Con had. Let mate go, Eros growled menacingly. She's quite soft. I think I'll hold on a bit longer. Con mused mockingly, and I cringed as he trailed his rough fingers down the side of my cold cheek. His hold on my waist was so tight I was positive he put a bit more strength into it. The bones there would fracture. I was barely able to get any air in with the way he was holding me. Aren't humans so fragile? I mean, if I wanted to. If I just twisted her neck a little bit. She'd die, wouldn't she? Con asked, wrapping his hand around my throat, tightly enough for me to feel the pressure, but not enough to choke me. I tipped my chin up, trying to get my neck loose from his hold. But he wouldn't give. If mate gets hurt, Eros will kill Con. Eros threatened, taking a step forward, and a scream tore from my lips as Con flexed his arm, a sickening crack resonating. The psychotic wolf had broken my rib. A pained growl ripped from Eros' chest. I swallowed thickly, trying to breathe through the pain. A single tear trailed down my cheek as my eyes burned with unshed tears from the pain. A soft whimper escaping Eros as he saw it. Let her go, Elphicon, a feminine voice said. I looked away from Eros to see the troops had surrounded us, pointing their gigantic rifles at Con. Give me your word, knight. Give me your word that I'll get my mate back and I'll let yours go. Con propose now. I whisked out, biting into my lip as I heard Con growl dangerously behind me. Eros, don't give in, I said to him. Eros gives his word, Eros announced, looking into my eyes as he spoke. Dread filled me as Con still didn't let go. You're not fit to be king, knight. And there's no king without his queen, Con said, his hand tightening on my throat until it felt as though he was crushing it with brute force. I talked desperately, tasting metallic blood as it filled my mouth, hearing nothing but the sounds of me choking on my own blood. Suddenly my body rocked forwards and I fell into the snow, the pressure on my throat being released. But a large weight had fallen on top of me. It was lifted off just as quickly, and warm familiar arms wrapped around me, pulling me into a broad chest. The sweet spicy scent I had begun to recognize as home filling my senses before my vision blurred until I could barely see a thing. Don't leave me, Angel, he begged, and I struggled to see through the darkness, looking into those honey eyes once, before my vision went black. Chapter 44. Sounds seemed to rush past me as I lay immobile. It sounded as though somebody was talking, but I couldn't make out what they were trying to say. I tried to move, to wiggle my toes, my fingers, anything, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own body, unable to do anything as I heard the person begin to grow desperate. That familiar husky voice started to tremble. He was crying for me, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it. A warm wet droplet of water dropped onto the back of my hand, and I jolted at the sensation, finally able to feel something. Alarikas called out my name in confusion, having seen my body jolt. I felt something warm and large resting on my hand, and I tensed. Trying to calm my breathing, I tried to concentrate on the muscles in that one hand, putting all my strength into moving at least one finger. My efforts were rewarded with a gasp from him, and I tried again to tune into what he was saying. Angel, if you can hear me, please come back to me. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. I promise I'll be better this time. Just wake up, please. What will I tell your parents? They trusted you to me. How will I face them if you won't wake up? He begged, yelling for a doctor as I twitched my finger in response. She moved. Alarikas yelled, presumably at the doctor who'd come in response to his desperate yelling. That's great. A gentle masculine voice answered shakily, a cold round compress being pressed to my chest, making me jolt again. The poor doctor, having been startled, let out an nervous shriek in response to my sudden movement. Alaricus growled angrily at the poor doctor for being so loud. Help her wake up, Alaricus commanded, already sounding quite frustrated with the doctor. I tried to peel open my eyes, to help end the painful transaction going on between the doctor and Alaricus quickly, but unfortunately the only thing I could do for now was move my finger. I don't know how to. Usually by now the wolf takes over, waking the person up, but the queendie doesn't have a wolf. The doctor mused quietly. I could bet my useless spinal cord that Alaricus was currently staring silently at the poor man, letting him know he was being very judged. So why are you here? Alaricus asked, his voice misleadingly calm. I work here, the doctor replied, sounding more like a question than an answer. No, I mean why would you come if you can't into a human? Why not send a human doctor? Alaricus asked. I'm not quite sure, the doctor answered, sounding as if he would drop into a coma any moment now. All right, so now you are going to go and fetch me a human doctor. And I swear if I see you anywhere near my mate again, I'm going to put you into a coma and send a human gardener to check on you. Do you understand? Alaricus asked, still sounding alarmingly composed. The man let out a squeak of agreement in response before a loud crash was heard. Either Alaricus had tackled him, or the man had tripped on his own. He can't even walk and he wants to treat my mate. Alaricus stage whispered to me, confirming that the man had indeed tripped. So the man began to say, but Alaricus cut him off with a brisk out. Alaricus, stop being mean. I croaked out, surprised that I had even managed to say that out loud. I pried my eyes open to look into Alaricus' bright honey eyes as he leaned over me, his eyes wide open. Hi, I whispered to a shocked Alaricus, who looked like a looming statue over me. My sweet angel. Gathering me up into his arms and hugging me tightly to his chest. I was so scared. I was so scared I had lost you. He told me, I love you. He chanted into my ear like a mantra, holding me so close to him as if afraid that I would slip away if he let go. Are you okay, love? Do you need anything? Alaricus gushed, helping me up so that I was leaning against the headboard of the bed. He fussed over the pillows for a moment, trying to fluff them without moving me, and I struggled to banish the dark spots from my vision as he did so. I still was unable to feel my legs, but that was just due to however long it had been since I moved them. I croaked out and he nodded his head immediately, letting go of me for a moment to pour me a glass from the pitcher of water that sat on the bedside table. He handed me the cup of water, before pressing a kiss to my forehead, and cupping his hands over my ears. I watched in fascination as his lips moved as he called out for someone while I drank my water. I'm fine, I told him, my voice still very scratchy, and now that I no longer felt parched I could feel that my throat still ached terribly. A knock sounded at the door and I looked away from Alaricus to see who was at the door. A young man with curly dark brown hair and warm ochre skin stood there, holding a big briefcase, wearing a white coat over clothes. I beckoned him in with a hand since Alaricus is absolutely useless right now, unable to stop staring at me. Good evening, your majesties, the man said smoothly, bowing down lightly before us, and I made a face making Alaricus let out a breathy little chuckle that sounded more like he was just relieved I was alive than amused. Alaricus pressed another kiss to my cheek, before reluctantly moving away so the doctor could check on me. How is Her Majesty feeling? The man asked, setting his briefcase down on the bed beside me. I put up a thumbs up, not in the mood to hurt my throat by talking again. The man smiled warmly in response. All right, well, I do apologize, but I will have to touch Her Majesty to check on your throat. According to what Dr. Dinner told me, that is where the injury is, the doctor said, and Alaricus scoffed, whispering about what a fitting name that was for the other doctor. Ignoring Alaricus, I gave the doctor a nod in permission and he stepped forward. His hands were slightly cold as he gently felt around the area of my throat, I could see Alaric tense, but he kept quiet. "Please open your mouth," the doctor said, grabbing a silver tool from his briefcase. He looked down my throat carefully, seeming very hesitant to touch me, choosing rather to bend himself uncomfortably to get a proper look. "How is she? Is she in any pain?" Alaric asked anxiously from behind the doctor, his face looking pale and slightly sunken. Dark circles had appeared under his eyes. He was still strikingly handsome, but looked more exhausted than I had ever seen him. If I wasn't so sure he was very strong, I would think he needed to be checked more than I did. The man looked about ready to fall into a coma of his own. "The Queen is quite all right, Sire Knight. The week-long rest has done her well. There is still some swelling and bruising, so I'd suggest she kept speaking to a minimum. Get lots of fluids. We've had you hooked up to meds all this week, so I'd like you to avoid medication unless the pain is too much," the doctor said, looking between the both of us as he spoke. "She must be in pain. Get her medication," Alaric ordered. I retaliated, shaking my head. "I'm fine. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Although my voice sounded anything but, I didn't like taking medication unless absolutely necessary. I could handle a bit of pain. "Well, I'll leave then, if you decide otherwise. But other than that you seem to be fine, Your Majesty. Please get rest, and try to drink some broth, or any juices to keep yourself energized. I'll have some broth sent for you on my way out," the doctor said, putting a small red bottle on my bedside table, before bowing once again and leaving the room. Immediately Alaric was at my side, gently taking a hold of my hand, as he settled into the chair pulled up to my bedside. I was so scared. "You've been out for a week, Angel. How are you feeling, really? Taking medication isn't a sign of weakness," he told me gently, lifting my hand up to his lips and pressing a kiss to the back of it. I shook my head at him silently, pulling my hand out his to ruffle his hair playfully, and he leans into my touch, letting out a quiet sound that sounded almost like a purr. "My adorable little wolf, I love you. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." My voice scratchy, and I tried not to wince at the sharp pain that shot through my aching throat. Alaric's eyes softened, looking like melted honey as he began to tear up, a single tear falling from his thick bottom lashes and trailing down his cheek. It disappeared into the slight stubble that had grown onto his cheeks. My poor baby looked exhausted, cupping his cheek gently. I wiped my thumb over the scruff, collecting the wetness of tear from it. "I should have been able to protect you. I never should have let Euros take over. If I had a clear mind, this never would have happened. My angel is suffering because of me," Alaric said, looking at me with big vulnerable eyes now. I said hoarsely, shaking my head at him. I needed to get myself a notepad, because talking hurt way too much. A knock sounded on the door and Alaric kissed my palm before getting up to go answer the door. "Thank you, Fatima," he mumbled, and I craned my neck to see who was at the door. Turning back to me, Alaric now held a large tray in his hands that had a big bowl of something that was steaming and a smaller bowl and spoon beside it. A tall glass of some funky-looking juice sat beside it. Alaric walked over slowly, carefully adjusting the tray so its legs were balanced on the bed around my lap. Alaric used the cradle to pour some of the salty-smelling light brown broth into a bowl, before lifting the bowl into his hands. Scooping up a spoonful, he gently blew on it for a moment before bringing it before my lips. I wrinkled my nose at the smell of the plain chicken broth. It didn't look very appetizing. "Please," Alaric mumbled, and looking into his tired-eyed, I knew now was not the time to be picky. I opened my mouth, allowing him to feed me the soup, swallowing it quickly so that I wouldn't taste it too much. I winced as the hot liquid went down my throat. It left the nasty taste of boiled chicken in my mouth. From when I was little, I'd always loved spicy food. Plain bland stuff grossed me out, but spice wouldn't be good for my throat, so for now I had to do with this. Alaricus fed me a few more spoonfuls before setting the bowl down and reaching for the juice. I stretched away from it, making him frown. I stared at it pointedly before looking back up at him. Leaning forward, Alaricus sniffed it lightly, his own nose wrinkling in response. Kale, mango, and carrots, Alaricus said, making my eyes widen. Why did the chefs hate me? Sighing deeply, I took a few sips of the strange-tasting liquid. Perhaps if it were only mango and kale it would have been all right, but the addition of carrot was making it nauseating. Alaricus poured another bowl of broth as I drank half the tall glass of juice. Even though I wanted to put it down after one sip, I didn't want to make Alaricus more stressed than he already was. I let Alaricus feed me a few more spoonfuls of the broth, before refusing to eat any more. It didn't go to waste though, as Alaricus drank the rest of the broth. Get rest, I said, and he seemed to misunderstand as he nodded his head, getting up from his chair and grabbing onto me to lay me down. I shook my head at him, and he looked at me in confusion, pointing at him. I patted the empty space beside me. He shook his head in response with a small smile. I'm fine, Angel, Alaricus said, and I pursed my lips, grabbing onto his arm, pulling him, making his eyes widen. Don't hurt yourself, beautiful. I'm getting in, Alaricus mumbled, gently disengaging himself from me and walking to the other side of the bed. He crawled in beside me, immediately wrapping himself around me, his arm on my waist, legs tangled with my own, head resting next to mine, making my heart warm. Turning to face him, I gently rubbed his under eyes with my fingertips, frowning at him. You know I can't sleep without you, Alaricus mumbled, grabbing onto my hand and intertwining my fingers with his own. He brought our hands to rest above his heart, the rhythmic pumping against the back of my hand making me feel at peace. Corn, struggling to swallow after to soothe my throat. The troops stuck in. You don't know how many calls from Alphas I've been getting an apology for them not being there to help, or checking up on Khan earlier. I didn't receive them, but they've been leaving messages for the both of us. Alaricus told me. You also have a visitor that wants to see you when you're feeling better, he said, and I arched my brow in confusion. As much as I wished it were, it couldn't be my parents. Perhaps Marina. I hadn't spoken to her for over a year though, so I was doubtful. You need to rest first. We'll let it be a surprise for later, Alaricus said, and I pouted in frustration, making him smile. Alaricus pressed a gentle kiss to my lips, tenderly wrapping his arms around me. He rolled me onto him, cradling me close to him. I missed you so damn much, Alaricus mumbled against my lips, and I rest my forehead against his, letting my eyes fall shut. They told me you would be all right, but you just weren't waking up. I was so scared I'd lose you. The one good thing in my life. You're so young. It terrifies me. If something had happened to you, you still have so much to experience, so much to do. For the first time I wished you weren't my mate. I wished I had never met you, Alaricus says, and I pushed away from him, tears coming to my own eyes as I turn over, scrunching up into a ball at the corner of the bed. It wasn't my fault I was weak, that I was young, or just a human. I couldn't change any of that. I'd always thought he was okay with all that, but apparently not. It made my heart ache far worse than my throat to hear him say that to me. I wasn't the ideal mate for someone like Alaricus, but I'd been trying my best. Angel, you've misunderstood, Alaricus said, trying gently to roll me over, but I shied away from his touch. I knew I wasn't queen material, but I never knew he thought that too. What I mean is, if you had never met me, you wouldn't get hurt. Your life wouldn't be in jeopardy. You would live out your life happily, and safe away from any kind of danger. I know you came out just to stop Eros from killing Khan. You ended up getting hurt while trying to protect me. You're the best thing to ever happen to me. I'm the one that's unworthy of such a blessing. I wish I wasn't your mate so that you could be happy. I have no hope of being happy without you, but you could have been. Alaricus explains, and I turn back to face him. Leaning forward, I dug my teeth into the smooth, soft skin of his throat. To my agent extraordinaire, my noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, I mumbled, but it sounded much more like a growl due to my hoarse voice. I couldn't explain to him verbally that I only wanted him, that he was worth every bit of trouble I went through. So biting him, marking him although the mark wouldn't stay, was the more convenient way to do so. Yours. Only yours. Alaricus breathed out, peppering kisses all over my face, removing any trace of tears with his sweet affection. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you, Alaricus whispered to me, holding me tenderly to his chest, nuzzling his face into my hair. He inhaled deeply and my eyes widened. I probably smelled rancid. How was he holding me? I leaned away from him, pointing to myself and then holding my nose. You smell delightful. Victoria came and bathed you daily. I washed your hair and brushed your teeth. I wasn't sure if you'd be comfortable with me seeing you and rest. But I needed to take care of you, so I just washed your hair. You were dressed every time I did. Alaricus clarified, his cheeks reddening. I don't mind. I whispered back, making his cheeks heat up further, and he leaned down to dig his face into my neck to hide from me. I started coughing lightly and he was off the bed in a flash, pouring me a cup of water, before helping me up to drink it. When I'd had enough, I lay down on my back and opened up my arms to him, setting everything back in its place. He crawled in, keeping his legs off of me so that all his weight wasn't on me, but rested his head on my chest, wrapping his arms around my waist. I ran my fingers through his hair, and in just a few moments he was asleep. A light laugh escaped me as I looked down to see his mouth open as he slept. Despite what he'd been through, he looked almost childish when he slept. It was endearing. Amara, he mumbled, and for a moment I thought he had woken up, but he only tightened his hold on me, nuzzling his face into my chest, mumbling my name once more. His eyes were still gently shut, and his breathing even. My wolf was still asleep. Somehow, while watching him sleep, I'd fallen asleep myself. How I was capable of sleeping again after an entire week of doing just that was beyond me. A knock sounded on the door and I was jolted awake. Alaricus let out a sleepy growl, snuggling his face into my chest, as he held me down on the bed by my waist. Clearly he wasn't ready to be awoken yet. Craning my neck, I looked out the window to see it was well past midnight. The night was dark and the moon was out. Don't move, Alaricus grumbled into my chest, burying his face between my breasts, and I shook my head at him. I was glad he'd found himself a comfortable pillow for the time being, but now he needed to move. Alaricus, I called gently, trying to wake him up kindly. I did that a few more times before stooping down to poke him, but when that didn't work, I grabbed his ear and pulled to the side until he rolled over with it. The terrifying thing was he barely made a sound. If he had slipped into a coma because he hadn't been taking care of himself, I was going to wait till he woke up and then murder him. But I doubted people could move so much or talk so early into their coma. Come in, I called out, gingerly raising myself so that I was resting against the headboard, my jaw nearly dropping as the familiar Finton face showed to the small opening the person had made in the door. Seeing we were relatively appropriate, she swung the door open further, revealing her entire frame to me. Relief filling me as I saw her body had grown to a healthier weight, and her face was practically glowing. Nicole, I called out as happily as I could with my hoarse voice, and she walked over to me, leaning down to give me a hug, cocking a brow at Alaricus, who was still out cold. I guess he hadn't slept for the entire week. I'm so happy you're awake. I came as soon as I heard what had happened. Nicole said, How are you? I asked her. I had to keep my talking to a minimum. It still hurt very much every time I tried to talk. Something nuzzled into my stomach and I looked down to see Alaricus had somehow in his seat managed to weasel his head back into my lap. His inner navigation system was off the charts. I've been well, as has Ibrahim. You don't know what it was like to see my family after that long. My mom tears up every time she sees me. Ibrahim wanted me to tell you he's very sorry, and wants me to keep updating him on how you're doing. She told me, I'm fine and not mad, I said to her, gesturing to my throat so that she'd know I wasn't being brisk on purpose. I wished I could speak to her properly to explain that Ibrahim had nothing to be sorry about. But even with my short reply, she looked very relieved. Nicole and Alpha Ibrahim were clearly very close, although I didn't think there was anything romantic about their relationship. Does he do that a lot? Nicole asked, looking pointedly at Talarikas, who was tightly hugging my hips as he slept. I nodded sheepishly in response and she let out a snort. I was used to it. But to others, realizing the infamous Alpha King they all feared was Nuggy Wolf was probably quite surprising. A knock sounded on the door and Nicole got up to answer it, the both of us sending one another a questioning glance. Nicole moved in the way only athletes can, with that easy energetic grace that they possess. I'd always envied those people. I craned my neck to see who was at the door, seeing the doctor from earlier. He was rummaging through his briefcase, and looked up momentarily, mumbling a polite hello, before going back to his briefcase. His head shot up again just a moment later. Alarikas, being the not-so-smart wolf he was, chose that exact moment to speak. "Who's at the?" he began, but I slammed my hand down onto his face, hushing him. He pressed a kiss to the palm of my hand and was back to sleep in seconds. The doctor's jaw hung open as he stared at Nicole, making me smile. Nicole wasn't the traditional pretty, but there was something very captivating about her. It was there when she'd come to the meeting, but now that she was in a better place, and in a healthier state of mind, it had been intensified. She had a thin but large nose, average-sized eyes, and a thin mouth, but she just had a laid-back confidence that was very attractive. She carried herself like a warrior, and it made people stare. She was beautiful, more so now that she was happy. "And you are?" Nicole asked calmly. "I'm Hayden," the man said, offering a hand to her, and she gave it a very brisk shake. He walked past her, mumbling a quiet "excuse me," and although Nicole was very calm, she gazed at the man curiously as he walked past her. She was to hurt for now, and love, although extraordinary, wasn't a compulsory. Some people could very well be quite happy without it. It was just nice to see that Nicole wasn't afraid of men after meeting one jerk. One of my neighbors had been unfortunately abused by her ex-husband, and for a few months every time a man came near her she would flinch. As far as I knew, the poor woman was still quite skittish around men. I was really hoping that would not be the case with Nicole, and to my immense pleasure, it wasn't, at least not visibly so. "How are you feeling, Your Majesty?" the doctor asked. "Better," I said hoarsely, and he nodded, looking at me for permission before poking and prodding at my throat the way he had before. Taking out a thermometer from his briefcase, he gave that to me to put in my mouth. Removing it from my mouth after a few moments, I gave it back to him to check. "You don't seem to have a fever, but your throat may take a while to get better. As I said before, just keep getting plenty of rest and drinking fluids. You'll be better in no time," he told me, casting side glances at Nicole every so often, who glared at him after she'd caught on. "By the way, Your Majesty, Frank and Victoria wished to see you, but I told them it would be better that they let you rest. They send their best wishes, though," the doctor said, and I frowned. Even though he was right, I needed rest. It would have been nice to see them. Maybe I'd go see them tomorrow. "To my audiobook extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfading enthusiasm." A smooth masculine voice squeaked from the door, and Erica shot up from my lap. "Dr. Dingleberry," I called out fondly, immediately regretting talking when my throat began to ache. I gestured him in with my hand. Alarikas had scared the poor man. He had provided me with quite some amusement while I was still in a coma. "It's just dinner, actually," the man corrected, and I tightened my lips, sending him an apologetic smile. "Did I not make it clear you want to come near my mate or me ever again?" Alarikas growled out, his voice huskier from sleep. I patted the side of his face gently to calm him, and he piped down a bit, glaring sulkily at the man. But at least he was no longer posed to lunge at dinner. "I wanted to apologize," the man said. "I'm really sorry," he continued as we all stared at him blankly. "Get out of here, Dingleberry," Alarikas said, My eyes lit up as Adarikos said it too. Pointing to myself, I pointed at Dinga and Adarikos chuckled. He looks the type, doesn't he? He asked and I nodded. Nicole, it's so good to see you, Adarikos said, cocking a brow confused at Hayden. Despite the man's dark skin color, he seemed to have blushed so hard it was visible. Bidding us all a good night, he gave an awkward bow before hurrying out of the room. How have you been? Adarikos asked her. A lot better because of you and Amara. Cyanide. I could never thank you enough for what you both did. I doubt you will. But if you do ever need me, I'll be sure to be there. It makes me really happy to know that Mutt is in jail. It serves him right, she said, and my eyes stung with tears. The sheer amount of people that went through abuse and slowly began to suffer mentally from it, such that they developed a twisted devotion to their abuser, made me want to cry. I was so happy Nicole had been so strong, but that wasn't always the case. Grabbing her hand, I hugged her close to me, startling her as I hugged her tightly. So happy, I mumbled as a pure explanation for my actions, pressing a kiss to her cheek, and she smiled at me, her dark eyes softening. She squeezed my hand gently before pulling away. I was usually a little erratic after naps. I guess that trait extended to comas as well. My cheeks reddened as I saw Adarikos staring at me out of the corner of my eye. His honey eyes softened with adoration. I'll leave you two alone now. I've taken up enough of your time, Nicole said, shaking hands with Adarikos and I before leaving, stopping at the door as if she had remembered something. She turned around, giving a little courteous bow before waltzing out, closing the door behind her. She looks really happy, Adarikos mused quietly, and I turned to look at him, nodding in agreement. I've never done anything for anyone, except you of course, but making you happy makes me happy, so that's different. I've never done anything for a stranger, and it feels really good. Thank you, Angel, Adarikos said, pressing his lips to my forehead. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our own thoughts, before I realized I still hadn't had a proper bath. Despite the fact that Adarikos said Victoria had bathed me, surely that was just with a washcloth. I wanted a proper bath. Beth, I suddenly said to Adarikos. Oh, okay, he mumbled shakily, visibly gulping. Stand. Help, I said, and he nodded quickly, getting up and off the bed to come to my side. I twisted around so that I was sitting with my legs dangling off the side, and placed my hands in Adarikos' outstretched ones. He pulled me up, and I kept my grip on him as I slowly wriggled my toes, wincing at the out-scrolling tight feeling that was in my currently asleep feet, continuing to flex my toes. I slowly rotated my ankle before moving onto my knees, and then eventually walking in place for a minute. I still needed Adarikos' support, but I could now move my legs and feet, although they were still a little numb. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, I asked him with a smile.